May kasabihan na boys don't cry at ang mga iiyak hindi tunay na lalaki. Kaya siguro may mga lalaki na inilalabas ang emosyon sa pag-arte at pagkanta. Tulad na lang ng Kapuso actor at singer na si Matt Lozano.
Galing ako sa isang dark na place ng buhay ko nung early 2016 hanggang 2017. Sabay-sabay lahat ng problem ko sa family ko, sa bandmates ko, nag-disband kami. Tapos nawala ako sa TV, nawala ako sa Itbulaga nung time na yun. So, sobrang depressing para sa akin. Lahat ng friends ko, hindi ko kinakausap. Nagkaroon ako ng addiction sa alcohol nung time na yun. Medyo hindi ko nakilala yung sarili ko. Nagkaroon ng time na gusto ko nang mag-give up. So, na nagsulat ako ng kanta, nasabi ko lahat ng mga gusto kong sabihin dun sa kanta na yun. Bigla akong parang, uy, okay ako ah. Parang bigla akong nabuhayan, nagkaroon ako ng pag-asa.
Kitams? Pero kung nakabubuti ang paglahad ng damdamin, bakit iniiwasan ito ng karamihan sa mga kalalakihan? Barako ba ang tunay na lalaki?
Hello mga kapuso! Ako si Dr. Ana Tuason, ang inyong kakwentuhan na psychologist sa Share Ko Lang. Tinanong namin kayo kung bakit hirap mag-express ng feelings ang mga lalaki. Pag-uusapan natin ang inyong mga shinare kasama ang Assistant Professor, Policy Consultant at Gender and Human Rights Advocate na si Michael Pastor. Hi Michael!
Hi!
Hi!
To meet you, Doc Ana. Yeah.
First of all, parang tama nga ba? Hirap nga bang mag-express ng feelings sa mga lalaki?
Siguro we can look at it from a larger view muna, from a cultural standpoint. Kasi parang most people would think that men are difficult to express. Parang sinasabi it's a male psyche or parang it's psychologically ingrained in men that it would be difficult to express. However, there are cultural situations that actually allowed for such kind of thinking to emerge. Hindi naman siya magiging stereotype unless there's a force or, for example, institutions in society that created that kind of situation. So if you would look at our colonial experience, nandiyan yung Spanish and American influence that have different set of values kung paano yung pagtingin sa kasarian. And you can look at it from a strong Spanish influence na back then, ang notions ng pagkalalaki ay very traditional, yung machismo, na dapat ang lalaki, protector, provider, kailangan may certain degree of violence na kailangan ng pursuit mo for honor. So dapat hindi pwedeng emotional ang lalaki because they would say na parang it goes against the thinking nature of man. Diba? Yan yung mga ganyang tunggalian in terms of paano ba dapat yung isang lalaki. So meron talagang cultural factor that led to that kind of thinking.
Meron pa ba tayong mga ibang expressions ng masculinity or even pressures in masculinity? Kunyari, kailangan barako, ganyan.
Kailangan ang Pinoy na lalaki barako, tigasin. So yun yung mga stereotypes. Pwede natin sabing linguistic siya, pero iba kasi siya pag na-articulate mo eh. Para for example, yung makikita mong may typical image mo ng lalaki, yung nasa kanto. 'Di ba? Yung nakahubad sa kanto, umiinom, may tattoo and all that, sometimes a conventional image of men that you would see. Makikita mo din yung stereotype na yung mga lalaki in suits na kailangan napaka-powerful, yung kailangan may facial hair ka. Yung mga physical pa lang yan In terms of behavior, I think we share pretty much yung mga values and practices that we expect men to do are shared across societies. Nag-iiba siya because we put a different hold on to it. It just so happens na ang mas priority or yung mas alam natin is to always to use the term pagkalalaki. Because I think that's the closest, most dominant term to describe what Filipino masculinity is.
Not all masculinity is toxic, right? So let's talk first about what masculinity really is. No? So how would you describe it?
If you would look at masculinity, you would consider it as a set of values, characteristics, norms, stereotypes that actually refers to what it means to be a man in a particular society. So, ang problema natin is that we have considered na may certain boxes ka dapat na chine-check para kung ano dapat ang isang lalaki. So if you would look at it from a cultural standpoint, iba ang measurement ng pagkalalaki sa iba't ibang bansa. So, doon tayo makikita na pag sinabi mong masculinity, dapat general yung view mo. I would agree that we need to look at masculinity not as entirely toxic. but rather masculinity as a system of behaviors na merong good and bad in the same manner as with femininity and other gender expressions.
What are the benefits to the person, to the relationship perhaps, or to society in general if we have masculinity?
If you want men to recognize themselves as men, we have to give them a chance to explore their range of emotions, to explore all things that human experience can offer. Yung pagkahon kasi natin sa stereotypes of what it means to be a man limits men to discover their full potential. Like for example, men are considered traditionally providers, pero with how things are going on right now, women are also becoming providers. So parang doon mo makita na hindi na siya traditionally exclusive for men. In the same manner na you see now women entering workforce, you are now seeing some men who are becoming house husbands. Yung mga nakakulong sa bahay, taking care of their children. And that should not be considered viewed as something bad. There's also totoo di ba nga, you're adding a much more conducive or healthier dimension to what it means to be a man. Na you don't just provide money and work for it, you also give that kind of emotional and loving environment for your kids, for your wives. I think that's one way for us to look at masculinity as a healthier practice rather than that it's toxic.
Gustong-gusto ko yung example mo, no, nung house husband. Meron bang kultura na napakalawak ng definition, napakalawak ng expression ng masculinity?
I think we can agree that yung range ng expression of masculinity na ganito is happening in society. Ang problem lang is that I think we give so much visibility doon sa traditional values dapat for men. I think yun yung gusto kong mas ma-emphasize. Bakit laging may external pressure instead of letting two healthy adults process and do their things responsibly? Men and women can have their clear arrangements on how they want things to be done.
Meron tayong mga FB comments din, no, from our mga kapuso, na sabi nga nung isa, di ba, bakit sila hirap mag-express ng feelings? Sabi kasi, afraid to be judged and misunderstood. So ito yung sinasabi mo, actually hindi nare-reward, di ba, ang authentic expression. So sabi nga nung isa, kasi may stereotype, kapag lalaki, hindi mahilig sa drama, as if naman wala kaming emotions. Tapos kapag nag-express, pagtatawanan na naman. So again, di ba, ridicule, shame, embarrassment. Kaya mas better, mag-isolate na lang kami. Yan. Sabi pa na isa nating kapuso, toxic masculinity kasi. Ang emotional mo, para kang babae. So yun sinasabi mo kanina, no? Porque emotional ka, nagkakaroon ng gender judgment on it. Sabi naman ng isa, ayaw namin kasing maiyak. Lalo na pag mabigat ang problema namin. Bakit ba maraming pressure? Saan nanggagaling tong pressure na to?
I think one way we can trace the pressure comes from is from society itself. We also need to understand and re-examine na parang may mga stereotypes na masama. May mga stereotypes rin naman that we can say considerably good. When I would look or evaluate stereotypes as an anthropologist, my concern is always not to ask why a stereotype is bad, but rather why a stereotype exists. May behavioral dimension na nagsusustain kung bakit ito nangyayari. It's toxic masculinity that forces men to damage themselves further. Na parang, because you need to always project yourself na parang, ganito kang klaseng lalaki. May mental health concerns ang men, sometimes the anger and the violence na yung pinaka-expression ng emotion. And that's really the problem.
Now, yung sinasabi mo nga, yung effects of toxic masculinity, meron tayong mga kapuso na nag-mention na rin kung paano naka-apekto sa kanila. Ang sabi ng isa, kikimkimin na lang ang emotion nila to the point na hindi na nila kaya. Tingnan nyo, mas madaming nag-suicide na lalaki kaysa babae. Kasi ang babae umiiyak na ilalabas ang sama ng loob. Sila sinasarili nila. Now, it's not necessarily as simple as that. Ang emosyon, mga kapuso, hindi ito parang nawawala, parang bula just because hindi mo siya pinapansin. The more hindi mo siya pinapansin, napupuno. Diba? Napupuno ka until either sasabog. Sabi naman ng isa, social anxiety and depression ang na-experience nila. Kasi usually, men are strong and independent. Pero kapag napahiya, yan, ubos ang self-esteem. So, hindi natin masyadong na-highlight ito, no? Pero parte yata ito ng toxic masculinity, yung sense of pride, no? Na kailangan hindi ka ever mapapahiya. Shame is a society's tool to pressure someone. Sensitive ba talaga to shame Ang lalaki,
Sometimes even men would use shame as a basis to conform to an expectation or to reinforce a stereotype. Pag honor, men are expected to always value their honor. Hindi ka dapat mapapahiya. Because for them, shameful is always something that's very much feminine. Parang pag napahiya ka, para kang nawalan ka ng dangal, nawalan ka ng ego, nawalan ka ng pride. And reinforcing these kinds of behaviors would often put men into unwanted situations. Yung shame is not just a form of regulation to people, to police bad behavior, but sometimes shame is also a means to force people to do bad behaviors. Diba? Parang hiyang-hiya ka na, wala ka ng hiya, might as well end my life. Yung mga ganong aspects na nangyayari. So, we need to understand that shame is not entirely gendered because it's something that's experienced by both men, women, and even, for example, members of the LGBTQ community as well. Diba?
paano natin sila pwedeng tulungan? Parang anong pwede nilang gawin? What can men do para they can para ma-prevent na maging toxic yung masculinity nila?
Multifaceted effort siya. I think even the partner should also be wary not to reinforce mga ganitong problematic stereotypes. I think as healthy adults, I think we need to give men the healthy or the safe space for them to be vulnerable. Because I think yun yung laging nawawala for men. They're not given the chance to be vulnerable, but they are always in vulnerable situations because of social expectations and pressures that they have to fulfill as men in our society. And remember, yung obligations nila as men is not just to you as a partner, but they also have obligations as fathers, as brothers, as siblings. It's not just simply telling them, sabihin mo sa akin ang problema ko. I think it doesn't work that way. Diba? You need to also show them na parang hindi mo lang mahahanap sa kapwa mo lalaki yung support na kailangan mo. You can also find it in the very people around you. And I think even yung people around us should provide that kind of environment for these men to be able to do it.
This is a societal expectation. These are social pressures. And as such, it takes the whole community, men and women, diba? Institutions as well, actually, diba? To allow men the safe space, sabi mo nga. Now, meron actually, I'm curious what you think about this kasi may mga kapuso na nag-mention kung paano sila nagko-cope. Okay, kung paano sila nagko-cope. Ang sabi ng isa, painumin mo ng Red Horse. Maglalabas yan ng feelings, English pa. Thank me later. Yan. So actually, medyo meron din kami mga comments na parang sa inom. Siguro kasi yun ang socially acceptable venue for them, di ba? Sabi ng isa, here's how we cope. I drink with friends, play video games. Yung isa, men can be vulnerable too, but with someone who can understand them. Yung sinasabi mo kanina.
Siguro una dun sa drinking, I think it's a common practice. It's a common practice that you can see not just in the Philippines, but also something pretty much evident in other parts of the world. Once you use drinking or once nakainom ka and you do that to inflict violence as another means to, express your frustrations, I think that's where the problem lies. So I think ang point ko doon is that you can go and drink, you want to use it as a coping mechanism, but drink responsibly. Use of video games, I think interesting to, gusto ko siyang i-point out that it's actually a good thing when men use video games or other forms of games as a way for them to release pent-up emotions or stress. Ito may camaraderie, friendship, yung brotherhood. I think we should not take away men from what makes them comfortable about themselves.
Ang sabi nila, parang ang importante na element para sa kanila ay someone who can understand them.
Regarding understanding men, ito naman din yung challenge. Parang you cannot always expect people to understand you if you don't give them the avenue and the reason para maintindihan ka in the first place. So yun, I think pagdating sa ganung mechanism, it becomes a very personal one kasi you need to overcome that sense of shame, that kind of vulnerability.
So siguro as females, especially if we are supporting our male partners, kung may ganon, di ba, kailangan open din tayo. Di ba? We're open-minded to think about ano yung iba't ibang paraan ng pag-express kasi baka tayo rin linilimitahan natin na kailangan through words at kailangan ganitong language at kailangan ganitong style.
I think I would want to say this with a very strong conviction that ang tunay na measurement ng pagkalalaki is not you complying to stereotypes or expectations, but you being responsible with your lives in all aspects. and exploring your own vulnerabilities. Because I think we need to trust that hindi kabawasan ang pagiging emosyonal sa kalalakihan, hindi masama na maging expressive ang mga lalaki. Walang masama sa mga bagay na ito because ito pa nga yung way for them to address yung mga deep-seated emotions that society told them na mali.
Nako, thank you, Michael Pastor, so much for talking to us today.
Thank you rin for the opportunity.
Kung may gusto kayong pag-usapan, mag-iwan lang ng comment below or email us at sharekolang@gmanews.tv. We're also streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.